Today we'll be going through how to install the latest release of Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, the desktop edition, and dual boot it alongside Windows 10 or 11. I'm here on the Ubuntu.com website where I'm going to download it first. I'm going to hit and select the Download Ubuntu Desktop option. It might be also under a download section. Either way, I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can download it direct and scroll down and look for the Ubuntu 24.04 LTS section and hit Download 24.04 LTS. Once you've done that, give it a few moments. I'm going to confirm below that it's Ubuntu 24.04 Desktop AMD 64 at the end for a 64-bit processor. Then I'll hit save and let it start downloading. Now that I've downloaded the ISO, I'm going to launch and use the Balena Etcher app, which will help me flash the image onto a USB, CD, or DVD of my choice. So I'm going to select the image that I just got done downloading. Here in my downloads folder, I have Ubuntu 24.04 Desktop AMD 64. I'm going to hit open. Then in the middle, I can hit change, where I can change the USB, CD, or DVD that I want selected. I have this verbatim store and go USB device, which is a 32 gigabyte USB where I'm going to flash my image onto. Just know that whatever USB, CD, or DVD that you choose to flash to, well, the contents of that storage disk is going to be deleted. That way, the installer can be flashed onto it instead. So just make sure you have the proper one selected. I know I do, so I'm going to hit continue. I'm also going to mention a few other applications that you can use to create a bootable disk. You can use UNetBootin or Rufus if you want to check those out or you're familiar with them. Finally, with that proper storage disk selected, I'm going to hit flash. The computer is going to ask me if I want to give it administrative privileges to do this task. Yes, I do, to start the flashing process. Now this will take a few moments while things are flashing. All right, now that the flashing process is done, I'm going to take my USB out of the computer that I'm currently using and go over to the computer where I actually want to install and dual boot Ubuntu and Windows on, and then start setting up a couple things on the Windows side. Okay, and on the Windows side of things, I'm going to log in. I'm going to launch a start menu and search for something called disk partitions. We're going to get a match called create and format hard disk partitions in the control panel. Click on this, and that will launch the disk management tool. This will help us edit our partitions on the Windows computer. That way we can have some room to install Ubuntu on this system. Notice I have a 100 megabyte EFI partition at the front. This helps you boot into your system. Don't touch this. Also, don't touch your recovery partition. Otherwise, you can lose the ability to recover Windows. All I'm messing with is the middle one here, the root file partition. So mine's called C. You also might have multiple disks, so make absolutely sure that you have the proper one selected and that you're working with it. And you only make edits to that disk where you want to dual boot Ubuntu 24.04. I only have the one disk, so I really can't mess it up. It has 128 gigs, which is correct for the space I have overall. So what I'll do is select the root file partition, and I'm going to right click and then hit shrink volume, and then shrink some of the space in order for me to have space for Ubuntu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select about half the space for Ubuntu, half the space for Windows. So I'm just going to take it down 64,000 megabytes or around 64 gig. I'm going to hit shrink, and then I should have a split space now, which I do. You can of course do however much you want. Just make sure that you at least have 32 gigs of space for Ubuntu. Otherwise, it most likely will not work. So we have around 64 gigs for the C root file partition for Windows and around 62.5 unallocated, which is going to be for our Ubuntu space. So no worries here. This looks good. And we'll now handle this on the Ubuntu installer side. I'm going to exit out of here and tell you to always back up your data. If you have things currently on the Windows side of things, and you want to keep it safe, back that data up just in case something goes wrong with the installation and you can't boot anymore. It's always better to be safe. So there's really two ways to get into that bootable disk that you just got done creating. One way is if you hit the start menu and then you type in boot, you should see something that says change advanced startup options. Click on that. This will actually allow you, if you go to the advanced startup and hit restart now, to restart your device and then choose a different disk entirely, perhaps a USB, CD, or DVD that you want to boot from instead of booting into Windows, which is very convenient because then you can get directly into the USB, CD, or DVD that the installer is on. Otherwise, what you can do is simply shut down your computer and work on getting into BIOS. I'll show you how I get into mine and what mine looks like. Basically, I just spam F2 when powering on the system after a shutdown. What I'll do then is change the boot priority around to select the USB, CD, or DVD that we just got done flashing and make sure it is the first disk to boot on the system. I will mention that this is for UEFI based BIOS. So make sure that you have a modern BIOS set up on your computer in order to go through the rest of the install process. And on my computer, when it's first loading up, it's going to ask whether I want to boot into BIOS. The key for my BIOS is F2 or the delete key. Yours might be something different. In order to get into BIOS, make sure to look it up for your particular motherboard or computer. So since mine is a newer UEFI based BIOS, yours might be different, but I can use the mouse on mine, making it a little more convenient. What we're looking for is to change up the boot priority. Conveniently enough for me, it's available here on the right hand side. So I can look through and try finding the USB that I just got done flashing on, but it doesn't seem to be in one of the top 4 here. So I can either click the boot menu option F8, but let's go to the advanced mode for me, F7, because this might be what your BIOS more closely resembles. On mine, I have tabs up top, so I can select between the tabs. I have main, AI tweaker, advanced, monitor, and boot. Yours might say boot or boot priority. Make sure to find this in your BIOS and then go down. You want to select your boot option number 1 to be the storage disk, either USB, CD, or DVD that you just got done flashing. So I know mine's a 32 gigabyte USB. So if I look through the list, I should be able to find something that resembles that USB. And here it is right here, my verbatim store and go 1100. It's got about 32 gigs. I know this is the correct one, so I'm going to select storage disk. If you have multiple, avoid selecting the partitions, select the entire disk. So this one's the entire disk. I noticed that by seeing no mention of partitions. Anyways, I'm going to press enter on this, and this should be enough to allow us to boot into our live environment or installer. I'll make one more mention here in BIOS. If you are trying to install Linux, you'll want to make sure that you have your secure boot settings disabled or set to another OS besides Windows, or else your system will keep trying to boot into Windows, regardless of what you have put into your computer. Also, if you can find fast boot on your computer, you might want to disable that one as well if you're having trouble booting into your Linux environment. All right, and if you made it this far, please smash that like button for me. You're ready to install Ubuntu alongside Windows. There's a few options here. You might get past this because there is a timeout. This is called the grub menu, and by default it selects the first option after a few moments. You can also select Ubuntu Safe Graphics if you're having issues trying to load into the installer, or if you have an NVIDIA graphics card. This will help you render graphics since they don't offer great out-of-the-box drivers for that. It has to be installed as third-party drivers. Again, if you have any issues with graphics, just choose the second option. So we're going with the try or install Ubuntu option. Just press enter, and let's give it a moment to load up the system here. And once the system loads up, you're going to be welcomed by the installer for Ubuntu. If workspaces show up, just click on the middle here. We really have this here where it says welcome to Ubuntu is actually the installer package. If for some reason it did not run, typically you can go to the desktop and you'll see Install Ubuntu 24.04. You can launch it from here. Sometimes it's also in the left-hand side where it says install release. Anyways, where it says welcome to Ubuntu, I'm going to choose the language that I want. The default English is fine for me. I'm going to hit next. On this screen, we're asked about any accessibility options that we want to customize for our needs. If you are hard of seeing, hearing, so on and so forth, you can actually select different types of options to be turned on for you. Make sure to go through these as necessary and then hit next. Then select your keyboard layout and hit continue. The installer is going to check if you have an internet connection. If you do, it'll give you the option of using wireless or wired depending on what you have connected. You can also choose the option of do not connect to the internet. Basically, this helps you check for extra software and packages that might help your experience. If you can, use the internet and then hit next. Now we're being asked, how would we like to install Ubuntu? Well, since we're beginners, we're going to use the interactive installation. It says this is for users that are guided step by step. If you're more advanced and you have an auto install config file, you can actually do it through the automated installation process. Anyways, with interactive installation selected, we're going to hit next. And on this page, we're being asked what apps would we like to start out with. The default selection is fine. This comes with the essentials, web browsers, and basic utilities. There's also an extended selection, which lets you use offline tools. Anyways, hitting next, and now they call this optimize your computer, but it's asking you whether or not you want to install recommended proprietary software. This is for things like proprietary graphic drivers or Wi-Fi adapter drivers. Definitely use this if you're doing NVIDIA or a newer Wi-Fi adapter card. It'll help. It says right here, including but not limited to NVIDIA drivers and similar. You can also download and install support for additional media formats if you need things like MP3, MP4, MOV formats. It can automatically be installed by selecting both of these and then hitting next. Otherwise, if you don't need them, deselect them, hit next. And here's where the real fun begins, the disk setup process. So how do we want to install Ubuntu? Well, for most of us, installing Ubuntu alongside Windows Boot Manager is a good enough option, but I'll show you the manual installation method with partitioning. That way you can have a custom disk setup and hit next. This is because some of our storage disks where we're trying to install Ubuntu on can be quite complicated, and sometimes it's just easier to create and size things yourself. This screen here now shows us all the available devices that we have on our system. You'll notice here SDA. You can think of this as the entire storage space, SDA. So all the way from here to the end belongs to SDA. Then underneath it, we have different partitions, things like SDA 1, partition 1, 2, 3, some free space, 4, and then a little bit of free space at the very end as well. So look at this right here. It says there's around 67 gigabytes of free space, and right above that we have around 69 gigs, which belongs to Windows. We do not want to touch this one or any of the partitions before that were already made by Windows. Make sure you are not messing with those at all. Otherwise, you'll screw up the Windows side of things. Instead, I want to focus on this free space. You might have to scroll down, but you'll notice a couple more places afterwards. This right here was the recovery partition that we saw earlier. Again, this is the C drive or whatever the root drive was. And then here we have that EFI part for Windows. And then you'll also notice a tiny bit of free space at the end. That's just because of the storage disk bounds. It's not quite aligning perfectly. No big deal. We'll leave all that alone. We don't want to touch any of these either because we only want to work with the free space that we created earlier in Windows. Also, if you have more than one storage disk, just make absolute sure you're working with the one that you made edits to earlier. I know this is the correct one for me because all the sub partitions are adding up, but you could have something like SDB or SDC, so on and so forth. You can have multiple storage disks. Again, be careful you have the proper one selected and that the partitioning scheme is looking familiar to what you had in Windows. I know mine is, so I'm going to select the free space and then click on the plus button below. And this is going to say create partition. I'm going to use the entire size that I'm allowed. And then I'm going to select from the drop down the ext4 journaling file system. And then as far as the mount point goes, I want this to be my root partition. I'm given a few options below. For root, I just select the slash. And then I'm going to hit OK. What you'll notice up top now is a new space filled in, and they're labeling it SDA5, at least for me. You can see the breakdown of colors right below, and we'll notice it says SDA5, ext4, a slash on the 67 gigs. So again, we have SDA1 followed by SDA2, which is really small, so you can't really see it. SDA3, which is a majority of this right here. SDA5 right behind it. A little bit of green at the end, SDA4, and then free space at the very, very end. Now, one of the most important steps is below. We need to select a device for the bootloader installation. If you hit the drop down, you may notice multiple options. You may not. We want to make sure we have the proper disk selected. I only have the one option. It says SDA, and you might have more. Again, make sure you're selecting the respected disk from what is above. It says SDA. Sometimes it'll also say SDA1 or letter number combination there with Windows Boot Manager. You can select that as well. So mine's on SDA, and it's the overall size of the entire disk because Ubuntu installer is smart enough to recognize where the current bootloader is. And what this will do is add both Windows and Ubuntu's side by side on Grub, so you can select between whatever system you want to run. If you have everything set up, you're now ready to hit the next button. So let's do that. Here you can put in a name. So I'm going to use SavvyNick as my name. I'm also going to name my computer SavvyNick. My username is going to be SavvyNick. Put in a password and then confirm that password. For the user, do not forget this because you'll be logging into with this user when the installation is finished. And once this is all filled in, you can hit next. You can select whatever time zone that you're in and then hit next. Finally, we're reviewing our choices here. It says it's a general setup on disk SDA with default applications, no disk encryption. I'm not installing proprietary software on mine because I don't have an NVIDIA graphics card. I'm using Partition SDA1 as the boot EFI partition, great, and then Partition SDA5 formatted as ext4 used for root. Fantastic. Understand once you hit install that these changes will take effect, and once you're ready, you can hit install. Now the install process has begun. This could take anywhere between 10 minutes to an hour, but take your time, wait it out, let Ubuntu do its thing. After this is done, we'll be ready to load into our newly installed Ubuntu system and check out Windows as well. If you're eager to see what's going on in the background, you can click the little command prompt and it will show you what actually is happening in the background for installation. Otherwise, you can deselect it and it'll go back to the default view. Okay, and after the installation process is complete, you'll be able to hit the Restart Now button. After you hit Restart Now, you should get a screen that says, please remove the installation medium. Let's go ahead and restart it. When it says this, it means it's safe to remove the USB, CD, or DVD that you were using to install Ubuntu. So it's safe to remove that media at this point. And after you've done that, you can press enter. If for some reason you missed this, not a big deal. Shut down your computer, remove your installation media, start things back up. Just confirm that Ubuntu is the first to boot in your boot priority, which will then allow you to select between Windows or Ubuntu. Okay, I'm going to press enter now and let the system load. If you get this grub screen, be careful, it might time out. You just have to press any key. You'll notice you have a few options, including Ubuntu, and then a few items down, Windows Boot Manager. Congratulations if you have this. You've successfully set things up. Let's make sure that the Windows side of things is still working, but I do want to make a couple mentions. One, make sure Secure Boot is disabled. Otherwise, your computer will try to keep loading into Windows more than likely. Some of you might have to disable CSM in your BIOS in order to disable Secure Boot. Look for something called Compatibility Support Module. And then two, if you have BitLocker installed, you more than likely will have issues with installing Ubuntu. Confirm you have it disabled if you did have any issues. Anyways, moving on, I'm going to select the Windows Boot Manager option and see if Windows will boot up. Awesome, I got the welcome screen, so I'm going to go ahead and put in my password and see if I can log in. Things are loading, so this is a great sign. Everything seems to be working correctly so far. Fantastic, everything loaded up properly for me. Now I'm ready to try out the Ubuntu side of things. I'm just going to go to the start menu and restart the computer. Give it a few moments. Fantastic, I could select Ubuntu from the grub menu, and now it looks like it's loading in. Give it a few moments. We're going to do some post-install setup and show you how to install some essential apps that you'll probably want with a fresh Ubuntu system setup. Okay, and you might be welcomed by an onboarding process. We're just going to hit next here. You can change your keyboard if necessary. You can set up location, services if needed. Select your time zone. I'm just going to select New York for myself. Put in a full name. That'll be your username. Set a password. This is for a regular user. Hit next, and then hit start using Ubuntu. Another thing I'll mention if you're on a laptop and want to use hibernation or relieve a little stress off your memory, you'll want to create a swap file. I have a link in the description below on how to do this. Most modern operating systems use swap files instead of swap partitions, so I didn't show you how to create a swap partition. It's much easier to manage a file. Fantastic. First things first, and let's get some essential apps. On the left-hand side, you'll notice an icon called App Center. Load this up and then search for these apps. By default, you have Firefox web browser, so if you want a different one, you can search for one. But one thing I'll suggest is the VLC Media Player. If you just type in VLC, you can install this package by typing in your password for administrative user. VLC is a great, versatile multimedia player that can pretty much handle any audio or video format or codec. So it's a great one if you want to start using Ubuntu effectively. If you need a free and open source image editing tool, there's GIMP. I highly suggest using this. Don't have to pay for it. You can also install this as well. If you need a great Office suite, you can install LibreOffice. It's a powerful Office suite that has things like word processing, spreadsheets, and presentations, and more. Another great one is Steam. If you want to play games, simply search Steam and hit install. And those are some of the essentials. Well, that's about it. Awesome job. If you were able to successfully dual boot Windows with Ubuntu, it's quite exciting to start using them both on one computer. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please make sure to post them in the comments section below. Make sure to subscribe for future videos. I'll catch you in another one. Thanks for watching. Linux can be hard to understand, but I take the most commonly used terms, commands, and subjects in Linux and I break them down into simple to read documents, including Linux terms, flashcards, a checklist, a cheat sheet, and a mind map. And if you're ready to level up your Linux experience and knowledge, go to learn.savvynick.com now and get access to these sheets.